Welcome, everyone, to Partner Up with Amy Carroll. As a communication coach, trainer, speaker, and author, I'm delighted to be your host and excited to bring you insights and ideas to help you solve your communication conundrums. This is the 59th episode of my show, Partner Up with Amy Carroll. And I have a confession. I just discovered that there's a front and a back to your mic. So just learn from my mistake. Make sure you can see the little button lit up when you're speaking into your microphone, people. Now, if you want to find out more about me, what the show is about, feel free to listen to previous episodes on my website, carrollcoaching.com, or go directly to the voiceamerica.com business channel. You can download the app there or tune in directly using your favorite podcast app. If you missed last week's show, it was an interview I did with Chaya Mistry, and we discussed what it means to be a more human leader. She's a delightful person, and I encourage you to go back and listen to that interview from October 8th. Now, today, my guest is a writer, a personal trainer, a firefighter, a tabletop game designer, a 3-time Ironman triathlete, an amateur evolutionary biologist, and also happens to be my nephew, Collin Carroll. Welcome, Collin.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Aunt Amy. It's actually... This is pretty typical for me. Every podcast or media appearance I've ever done, presumably ever will do, just because I'm related to the host.
Well, good thing we have a big Irish Catholic family.
Yeah, exactly. We're just waiting for all the aunts and uncles to move through it. And, you know, you and my dad are each one of 7, and my mom is one of 6. So really, there are a lot of podcasts out there. Statistically, half of them are hosted by someone I'm related to.
So for the listeners, Carl, you grew up in Westport, Connecticut, and you spent time half between your roommates, mom and dad in Westport, and Yep. You now have your own apartment in New York City. Congratulations.
Once I wrote the book, started realizing that, okay, it's time to move on.
And I love the fact to know that how much time do you spend as a volunteer firefighter in Weston, Connecticut?
It really depends week by week. The nice thing about it is that it is a volunteer job. So some weeks, you know, I'll be completely crazy myself, running around, spending time in the city, trying to work on my own business, and won't be able to make too many calls in. And then other weeks I'll be able to get 1, 2, 3 in a row. So I would say it depends on the week. On the busy ones, you know, it can be up to like 15, 20 hours a week. And wow. That's in addition to ones that you might take just kind of on call, where mm-hmm. you're not actually on a scene, but you're just waiting for something to happen. Mm. And sometimes I just will be able to get 1, 2.
Okay. You know, Collin, I'm guessing that what we're going to be talking about today, there's going to be probably some examples and stories related to being a firefighter. So I'd love to hear those connections. All right. So listeners, here's what we're going to talk about. So Collin, my amazing nephew, and I am not biased, people, he wrote this book recently published called Fitness by Darwin. So Collin, before you tell us about the premise of the book, let's have you talk first about how you discovered your passion for exercise, why that became so important for you, and why you devote your life to it.
Absolutely. Exercise is one of the things that I could just talk about. And I mean, I wrote a book about it. So obviously I can talk about it. I'll try not to, for any listeners that are opposed to exercise, I'll try to make it a little bit broader than just exercise. But personally, I think I realized the importance just the first time was really when I was in high school. I was on the school's rugby team, and I was genuinely, as a freshman, I think the worst one on the entire team. Like, they put me on the wings and they gave me maybe the last 15 minutes is just dust up. And I spent the summer and the autumn working out and trying to train myself and trying to get into that. And lo and behold, by spring, I was starting. And that was something that I didn't quite realize, that hard work could yield rewards and could allow you, personal betterment and professional betterment. Ding, 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 so that was yeah, exactly. So exercise sort of taught me the importance of that. And then it was really, really, really laid down back in 2011 because I have ulcerative colitis, which is a digestive disease, as you know.
Yes.
And you get the family newsletter, all the updates. Just kidding, people. There's no family newsletter.
No, that's a good idea, because I wasn't told that your mom was pregnant with your sister till she was 5 months pregnant, and everyone thought I knew. So I'm still traumatized by that.
So I guess there's demand for the family newsletter. Benefit. We'll post that out for the listeners. They could just join in, see what the Carrolls are up to. When I was in 2011, I was a sophomore in college, and I was going through an ulcerative colitis flare-up that left me in the hospital. So I spent a week in the hospital at the beginning of my second year. And by July of the following year, 10 months, I had been able to do my first Ironman just by recovering. And the basics, but it was definitely a rough time that week and the months afterwards, and just the recovery and rehabilitation of that. But when you're so active, I think there is something that really, it's healing. And we're seeing more and more of exercise as medicine, this idea that exercise and wellness aren't just these kinds of aesthetic, beneficial for the people who are going to the beach genres. They really can be something that will help you live longer and will help keep you strong and will keep you fit and will help your joints feel better, and just it allows day-to-day life to be that much easier. And I found that myself after my ulcerative colitis flare up, and then eventually the triumph of finishing that first Ironman has been really definitely carried me through some days.
When did you first have the goal and desire to do an Ironman?
I stopped playing rugby due to injuries in high school. I was getting banged up. For those who do not know our family, we are a short people.
That's putting it mildly.
It's putting it mildly. At 5'8", I'm kind of looking down on most of the aunts
you're
and uncles. Sadly,
one of the giants.
One of the giants. So I got banged up a little bit, and then moved into triathlon. And I'm someone who I think really does better when he can throw himself into something. And so signed up for an Ironman after doing my first little Olympic distance triathlon, which is much shorter. And that was it. I just realized that I wanted to do that.
It's give the listeners a rundown on what an Ironman consists of.
So you start with a 2.4 mile swim, and you get out of the water.
I thought you were going to say run. I'm like, oh, that's not so bad.
Oh no.
Oh God, I don't know.
No, it's a 2.4 mile swim. You get out of the water, you strip off your wetsuit, and then you go for a 112-mile bike. Then you pop off your bike into your running shoes and you run a marathon. So 26 miles.
Oh my God.
Yes, it definitely takes a certain type to want to do that.
And so at that point, when you completed that first Ironman, was it already solidified for you before that? Or was that after that accomplishment, like, okay, I can go from being in the hospital 10 months later to completing this race. There's something here to pay attention to.
I think that was the biggest one, is just, of course, when I was in the hospital, I didn't think the Ironman was ever going to happen, but thanks to modern medicine, I got out of the hospital. So I really appreciate the medical team at UNC Chapel Hill and the rest of my teams that have worked with me to keep me actually out of bed. So they were able to tamp it down. But once the major symptoms went away, exercise was the thing that there's something about not having a thing that makes it that much more desirable. Yeah. And for me, when you get laid out in bed for a week and then you aren't able to actually exercise because you've lost so much blood for a few months after that, the importance and just that being taken away, the ability to move and to exercise being taken away, made me understand just how unbelievable and how lucky I was when I was able to exercise again, how great it was.
Yeah. So that was 2011. What year did you embark on this journey of writing this book? And what was the impetus? And did you know from the very beginning that that's what you were setting out to do?
After graduating college, I I finished a year early. So I kind of moved around to Denver, Colorado, became a personal trainer, was not a very good personal trainer, but just going with the basics, bicep curls and certain kinds of squats, whatever, however I had learned it myself.
Mm.
And then moved to New York City, started to actually go along in the career of being a trainer. And it was through that I started realizing that certain movements were really, really good for the body and certain movements weren't really great for the body. So that kind of sparked my curiosity as to why were certain movements, even with people who might have shoulder injuries, why were they able in a short period of time to start doing pull-ups? That doesn't seem like it would be expected. And why was bench press so bad for them? Because I had been doing bench press my whole life up to that point. And that curiosity led me down the road to, maybe human evolution and the movements that we evolved to do. Maybe these things are related to the movements that we currently should be doing in the gym. And it was that line of thinking that led to me first start to research, and that research eventually, I didn't think it was going to become a book. Honestly, I thought it was going to be a little op-ed or something that it was a blog post. And 4 years later and 600 scientific sources
later,
my
God,
it is Fitness by Darwin, the book.
So give us the premise.
The premise is that evolution should inform the way that we exercise. It's the basic one. So 3 movements that have been really important and honestly integral to the way that our species evolved, which were climbing trees, running, both fast away from things and slow to catch up to things, and carrying, so picking something up off the ground and moving it from one place to another. Climbing, running, and carrying are the 3 movements that I see as most important to our evolution as a species. And as a result, if we can do exercises that mimic those movements in the gym, we're going to be stronger, we're going to look better, and we're going to avoid injury.
Wow. That's especially that last one, avoiding injury, because you must come across, especially as a personal trainer, so many people who injure themselves in the gym.
It's kind of crazy. It's just, I've done some of these exercises that I used to do so frequently, and I just leave after doing a set of something like bench press feeling like, why are my shoulders hurting so badly? Why is it? It's not a good pain. It's not like, the burn. It's not like you're feeling a great workout. I just feel like there's just a tightness. There's someone jabbing an acupuncture needle into my joint, something bigger. I don't like doing those movements as much. And I really do think it's because bench press and a series of other movements are not evolutionary. Humans never had to push rocks from a laying down position forward and back up, or really, there are so many things we do in the gym that can't be related to how our species worked out. And the further we get from that evolutionary history, I say the more risky the workout routine becomes, the more adverse our body is to those movements.
So let me go back now to that. You mentioned 600 plus references, scientific references. What was one of the most tedious parts of all that research and coming up with the sources?
I think that tedium is in the eye of the teed holder, I guess. Just that for most people, combing through, because those were the 600 that I used. There are so many sources that you come across that end up not being particularly relevant. Right. And you just can't be throwing the whole kitchen sink at the reader. Yeah. When you write a book that's sort of based in science. So it for me, sorting through all of that was not tedious at all. Okay. Tedium to me would be, I don't know, what other people would really love, like programming, computer programming, or learning a language. That is the most, that feels like torture. Torture, yeah. Amy. So when I can sit in front of a computer and be like, oh, that's a fascinating study, that would go really well alongside this other one. They're making a cohesive point. There are people like you, because that I can
I have to say, I was able to read your book and stay with it and follow along. And I loved all the little humoristic anecdotes. I'd have to go back sometimes. I'm like, okay, now I knew there's a joke in that. Why didn't I get it? And then, it took me sometimes. Your humor is so brilliant that it was more subtle than my brain was able to absorb around the first go.
I appreciate that you read it like The Great Gatsby, like you're going for the English report. That's familial love right there.
Yes, you're welcome.
But it is supposed to be accessible. It is supposed to be, the average person should be able to read this book and take a few things away from it for their own gym routines or just for their everyday life. Mm-hmm. If it's picking up their grandkids, maybe I should pick up my grandkids by planting on one leg and going into kind of like a little reverse lunge towards them rather than just bending down at the waist with my feet planted, because that could lead to back problems. That could lead to back pain. So I try to make it really accessible. Yeah. I don't want it to be like, according to blah, blah, blah et al., this thing is suggesting that we should move this way. But according to blah, blah, blah et al. 2019, maybe it's I want it to be something that you can, it's not going to be a page turner. It's not going to be a Grisham novel, but it should be something that pikes the reader's attention. Yeah, no, I think you definitely accomplished that.
Thank you. And knowing that you enjoyed all this research, were there surprising studies you came across while writing the book?
Well, I just realized that I said piked instead of peaked for the reader's interest. So I don't know. I think I may have lost I think your listeners may be a little suspect of my expertise if I can't.
Oh, Collin, I'm
mispronouncing.
Collin, I was interviewing Pat, your aunt, my sister. I had her on many, many months ago. I went to introduce myself. I mispronounced my last name.
Ooh, our last name.
Our last name.
Our last name. Oh,
so
that's rough.
Yeah. So you trust me, man. Listeners are going to be they're fine.
They're used to it.
They're very used to it.
Laid out a groundwork. There is one really, really interesting study that's towards the back of the book. And it's about just carrying exercises and deep core strengthening exercises. I want to get the exact number of people right, but they divided two groups of people with low back pain, or they divided a bunch of people with low back pain into two groups, one of whom they put on like a deep core training routine.
Yeah.
And the other half who they put on just a general exercise routine. And the ones who did the deep core training saw significant drops in pain intensity, pain descriptors, and functional disability, whereas the control group saw almost none of those gains. And I think the craziest thing is that in that deep core training group, 9 of the people involved in that study were taking painkillers for low back pain. And by the end of the study, only 2 were taking painkillers now. Whereas the control group, 9 people were taking their medication and all 9 continued at the study.
Wow.
So, and I think that was from the Brazil's University of Sao Paulo. I think that's what it was. To me, that's the name of the game, right? That's exercise is medicine, clear as day. If it's going to help people get off pain medication, if it's going to reduce the level of back pain to that extent, that's what we all want.
Right. No, that's phenomenal. So you were hinting at some exercises that you now turn your back on, to use a physical metaphor.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't going to understand it otherwise, but.
So what are some of those exercises that you now say, people, these are suspect, be warned?
The funny thing is I think most everyone would agree that certain exercises are better than others in the gym. Mm-hmm. At least people who have studied it and who are professionals in the fitness world, which is the scary part, that some professionals even stick to some exercises that I think are pretty clearly not evolutionary, and not just disevolutionary, but dangerous.
Okay.
The biggest one is, I think, the weighted good morning. It's called a good morning exercise.
Okay.
It sounds so friendly. wake up and you have a good morning. You take a bunch of weight onto a barbell on your back, and you basically lean forward until you're at close to a 90-degree angle in your hips, and then you stand back up. So you're just bobbing forward and backwards with a bunch of weight on your shoulders.
Wow.
And some would argue that, well, if it's done properly, it shouldn't be a problem and it should activate the right muscles and the hamstrings and all this other. I don't know. Bruce Lee, the very famous fitness and martial arts practitioner, was doing that exercise and experienced an injury so bad that it left him like bedridden. This is Bruce Lee. If Bruce Lee can't do it right, the average person can't do it right.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, something that I would say, when you're an exercise like that, almost everyone, I think, should agree at this point that that exercise should not be in the average person's repertoire. It really shouldn't.
Yeah. And you want to, how I want to say this, just the fact that there's such a probably a high risk of injury. Why take the chance?
Right. And people would say, well, there's this hamstring activation that gets elicited. Okay, but we can do other exercises that are far less risky, as you've said, to elicit muscle activation in the hamstrings. Yeah. And that's the point of the book, is that some exercises, the ones that can be based on human evolution, good. Others, not good. I cannot imagine an evolutionary circumstance where we're leaning as far forward as we can with a bunch of weight on our shoulders and then standing back up.
Maybe if Jorg fell into a cave and Albert had to lean over with no, I got nothing.
Yeah, but they're probably not from a standing position. And he would probably, you know what he'd do? He'd reach in and he'd pull him up like there you go. Like an action movie where they're hanging off the cliff. And that pulling like that, that's basically okay with just that. The same. Yeah, that's the same motion as climbing, pretty much.
Jorg would be saved. Yeah, it was acceptable in your opinion.
I do love that, though, that there's always like, well, I could be convinced to think that someone needs to bench press if maybe a rock lands on them and they get trapped. My favorite was, I read online somewhere, there was a guy arguing bench press was a functional day-to-day movement because he knew someone who got trapped under a boat and then had to push it off him.
Those boats, man. Just last week, I saw that happen.
I think, honestly, I think the statistic is something like 3 out of 10 Americans will be trapped under a boat at some point in the next year. So I understand where he was coming from, but maybe there's a part of me that thinks maybe that's not that functional. Maybe that doesn't happen all too much.
Yeah. When we come back from the break, Collin, well, actually, before we move into the break, were there any other exercise you want to mention, to just kind of warning, stay away from? These are the similar to the morning bench, morning, whatever.
Yeah, the good morning.
The good morning.
There are a couple that I don't love. Again, I wouldn't necessarily bench press all that much myself nowadays. Mm-hmm. And I did bench press. So I'm kind of the apostate there, saying that we should no longer be doing bench press all that frequently. I prefer to go with exercises that I really love. Weighted reverse lunges, I think, are great. They can strengthen the gluteus medius, which is the big side butt muscle. Versions of pulling exercises, lat pull downs, pull-ups, if you can manage them. There are a bunch of exercises of my own design that I have on Instagram, Fitness by Darwin on Instagram.
So thank you for plugging that, because I want to say that right now, because as you're saying these terms, there's going to be listeners out there going, I don't know what he's talking about. Well, listeners, my friends, Collin has done a brilliant job of assembling dozens and dozens of videos on Instagram that are very, very brief, that walk you through the exercise, that explain it, that show it. You just did a great job with those.
Thank you, Amy. That's been my big project now, is to, for the hundreds or so, like the 300 or so exercises that I see as evolutionary, I try to just give a quick brief breakdown online of how to do it properly and 300. What muscles it'll work. So there's quite a variety of evolutionary exercises.
Wow. So it's going to be hard to get bored and stuck in a rut.
I certainly haven't, but again, type of person who does multiple Ironmans is not the best in terms of their enthusiasm for exercise.
Well, so listeners, if you want to connect with Collin, you got a couple options. Definitely check out his videos on Instagram. You can find them at Fitness by Darwin. You can also email Collin directly, and that's Collin with 2 L's, COLLIN at fitnessbydarwin.com. And that's FITNESSBYDARWIN.com. All right, so Collin, we're going to take a break now. For listeners, if you want to get take your superhero partner powers into the next decade, join me for my online leadership presence course. And you can find more information about it on my website, carrollcoaching.com. And that's 2 R's and 2 L's, right, Collin?
2 R's, 2 L's.
When we come back from break, we'll be hearing more from Collin. Stay tuned. You're listening to Partner Up with Amy Carroll on the Voice America Business Channel. Welcome back. My guest today is Collin Carroll. And we've been discussing his book recently published called Fitness by Darwin, and how these 3 main evolutionary movements can contribute to, how do you say it? Greater health, fitness, and reducing injury or recovering from injuries.
Oh yeah, you lost it a little. It was a little bit. You had it.
So close.
I like going with the basics of it. They'll help you look good, get strong, and avoid injury.
Darn it! It was right here.
It's on the cover of the book.
It's on the cover of the book. Look how
you're trying to go based on your
coffee stains. I don't even drink coffee, and I got coffee stains on your book.
People, that's how you know that you read it.
Yeah,
I was like, get coffee stains on a book that you haven't read. Never noticed that.
I was like worried. I'm like, no, this is a good sign.
Yeah, no, you should see my copy of Harry Potter. I read it when I was 9. I don't know how there's so much coffee on it.
So, Collin, for listeners, we've talked about my siblings, Kevin and Pat, a tiny bit. All 3 of us are communication coaches, trainers, and Kevin has gone on to reinvent himself. And again, we're going to talk more about that later, though. Pat, Kevin, and I work with helping people to develop their leadership skills, their presentation skills. And Collin, I'd like for you to talk about the connection between that work and how exercise can help people become even more effective as leaders.
Kevin, for the listeners who might not know, is actually also my father. So I've got to tread very carefully so I avoid any awkward dinner conversations where he's like, you think you can teach people how to be a better leader than me? He's not like that at all. He's very sweet, my dad. I think it's a really good point to make. I think it's a really good point that exercise and fitness and wellness have such a bearing on could have such a bearing on people's professional success. For instance, again, studies. I always love studies. A study in the book that I cited was about how people with better posture are generally ones who are going to be assumed to be more confident in their ideas, more presentable, more leaderly. These are the type of traits that people might not even think of. It's so easy to think of the gym as just, all right, I read on the New York Times or I read on wherever that I have to do 30 minutes of this 2 times a week, so that the American Heart Association also says that if I do this and I go for a long walk, then maybe I'll get an additional 4 years on the earth. Which is true and great. But day-to-day life, if you're trying to make yourself a leader, if you're trying to make yourself an effective and accessible corporate or professional presence, literally presence, good posture, and the myriad benefits that come with it, it's really important to have down. And the right exercises will get you there. Will get you good posture.
Yeah. So when we're coaching people, often I'm coaching them on a warm smile, direct eye contact, relaxed stance, or a louder volume, or pausing, right? All of these things that lead to projecting competence and confidence. And so this point about good posture, it's just such an obvious example of another way to project that confidence. And
right.
I think people might be listening, oh, come on, give me a break. You've got to be able to run the business and have knowledge. Yes, we're not saying you can't have those things. You can't just show up with great posture and fake it till you make it. No, there's an assumption that you have all those other qualities. And someone with slumped posture who might have a poor core, and someone who with listen to me, and someone with a strong core that projects greater confidence physically because of just the way they're standing, will absolutely show greater or communicate greater confidence in the people they lead, no doubt.
And it's so funny. It's not just other people. It's also oneself.
Yes.
Like if you have better posture, you will be more confident in your own ideas. You will project more positivity. You will project more. It sounds so mumbo jumbo, but this has been looked at in a double-blind, professionally designed study that can see that people who, and I do use it in the book, people who have this postural connection, or people who are able to sit up taller, stand up taller, be a little bit straighter, they themselves think more positively of their ideas. So if you think more positively your ideas, then the people who you're projecting to will also start noticing that as well.
Right.
Beyond what they actually will see themselves.
Yeah. You'll be more likely to pitch it. So something to share with you. It's not a perfect connection. So let's see what you can pull from this example. I started doing cross-country ski marathons about 18 years ago. And one of the things that came as a result, Collin, which I was so surprised about, was I trained for the marathon. I completed the marathon. I did it within the time frame. They didn't have to ask me.
They didn't have to follow you up like a bunch of James Bond villains skiing behind you.
No, luckily.
Just trying to pull you off the course.
And what followed was my level of confidence increasing, having accomplished that physical challenge.
Right.
So my sense is that, not only are people going to be feeling, because they're going to be looking better, feeling stronger, that it's that impact of confidence radiates in other areas of my life now.
Absolutely. Right. And the thing is, while you are the professional in terms of, here are the cues that you can take to make yourself, here are the pauses you can take. Here are the ways that you can change your volume. Here are these like modifications that you can make. And those become so helpful as they become more and more ingrained. The best thing about being fit is that if you've got there, it's completely unconscious. It just exists inside of you. Like you don't have to, if you have the strength of the muscles, if you have the ability to have this greater posture, it doesn't become, I don't think about my posture in day-to-day life, truly. But because I'm in the gym, because I have these exercises that strengthen the core and glutes and back muscles, the things that are related to big posture, it just happens. So it's very unconscious. You can get this benefit without having to sort of self-censor as you're going through, am I presenting the right way, or am I taking the pauses I need to? It becomes ingrained, truly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then the other thing, if the listeners haven't made this connection, it's reducing injuries, or reducing the likelihood of injuries, more accurately. And then you're not going to be in physical pain. You're not likely to have to take sick days.
Right. Now, all of a sudden you cash them out at the end of the year. You just got yourself a bonus. You get cheaper healthcare. I think some bosses, some employers will offer you discounts on your healthcare. I think if you have a certain heart rate, or I don't know what metrics they use. Really? That's obviously not scientific studies. That's just me kind of half remembering something I think I read on the news, but I do think that I read it on the news at some point.
Yeah. And the idea of cashing in your unused sick days, technically making money off this, being healthier.
Exactly. So you just paid yourself out a bonus.
So Collin, I want to talk about your experiences as a firefighter and how this level of fitness that you have, how that has helped you. And what do you see with other firefighters? It just seems like that is probably a profession that it's even more crucial that people are in good physical condition.
Professionals very much are tested and are regularly encouraged and instructed on working out, and they're drilled constantly. They're making sure that they can use all their equipment and they have the physical capacity to do so. There is definitely a floor for volunteer firefighting where you aren't expected to pass out on the side of the fire. You're not expected to, you are expected to not, get winded if you're just lugging an air pack around. There are these bare minimums, but it's a little bit more relaxed.
Okay.
However, when I did my training, I found that we had a big part of training last summer that took weeks and weeks, 90-degree days in the summer and 90 degrees in the Northeast summer, like the US Northeast, for those who are not familiar, is humid, extremely humid. You grew up in it. You would know. I grew up in it. Oh yeah. So those days that are brutally hot and devastatingly humid were actually much more manageable just because I was able to do all of these movements because I had the baseline of fitness. Wow. And you never know. Not everybody is just going to be a volunteer firefighter, but who knows what circumstances you're in, be it something like you have to run to catch a bus, or that people after work ask you, hey, we're going to play a game of soccer, pick up soccer, whatever it is. You never know what circumstances life is going to throw you in. And I think most people would want a pretty solid base in how they can actually move because there's a lot of pressure to say yes to these things or to move yourself in day-to-day life. Right.
Yeah, because then there's what you're talking about is an informal networking. And if you're having to exclude yourself for physical, to avoid physical injury, that's a missed opportunity.
There are these little things that are just so probably not even considered. And it's unfortunate. Yeah. I think most people who are fit or who make a career out of it or who are professionals by no means look down on anyone who's not fit. You have a couple of the loudmouths, as there are in any field, but most people really just want everyone to be a part of what has brought them so much joy. And that's how I feel. The thing that has given me so much purpose and has been so rewarding to me, I want everyone to be able to be in the gym and to maximize the efficient time that they get in the gym. I want everyone to feel like they only need to spend 35 or 40 minutes in the gym and they've gotten this insane full body posture core workout without having to do this crazy high intensity interval work that leaves them feeling like they can't get off the couch for the next 2 days.
Right.
I want it to be very accessible, but also very meaningful and very efficient. So I think I'm like most in the industry who just want to share, hey, these are some exercises that have brought me a lot of benefits and a great number of benefits. And I want them to bring benefits to you.
And speaking of
listener in your car right now,
speaking to you also listeners, I didn't mention this before. If you go to Collin's website, you will be able to download the PDF of his book. So he's not just preaching here. I love that it's really such a passion for you that you want to be generous and share this with people, that you don't even want there to be a barrier for them to access the book.
No financial barrier. You can get it for free right now. You can just go to fitnessbydarwin.com/book and just click a download of the PDF. And I think I have it on, I don't know if it's on both Google Drive and Dropbox, but definitely on Google Drive, where you can just take the whole PDF with the pictures and everything else and have that at your beck and call. Now, I'm someone who likes a nice physical copy of a book to get coffee stained and to get banged around, right?
Exactly.
Use it as a coaster. It's got practical value. I like that. But, and if you like that too, it's on Amazon, Fitness by Darwin. But for some people, it might not be the case. And if you want to maybe give it a try out and see if the logic and the science makes sense behind it, then yeah, download the PDF for free.
Yeah. And also, I think for people who are very visual, because as I was reading, I had forgotten about your Instagram account because I just don't spend a lot of time on Instagram. So even though we connected, I had forgotten about it. And as I was reading the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, these pictures are great. I'd really love to see a video of him doing this. And then all of a sudden I'm like, Amy, go to Instagram. So I was thrilled to be able to get those mini little videos. So thank you. All right.
Good.
So I want to spend some time talking about some of your other passions.
Really?
Let's give a little backstory about your dad's
basket weaving.
No,
just kidding.
Your dad's third career transition, and then how you got involved in it.
Like father, like son, right? He's got 3 careers. I've got 3. It's more similarities between the two of us than either would like to admit. Yeah. So he was in advertising for many years. Then he became the corporate communication speaker that you and your sister and him have been able to push through. And then as kind of on a whim, he decided to get into just tabletop game design. And a friend of his from his advertising days was also interested in doing so. And they partnered up and created this game, Tenzi, the speed dice game. And it became this blockbuster hit in the tabletop game world for all the people who have all the parents who have their young kids. And eventually, because it was successful, they were able to say to the kids and the wives and the rest of the family, hey, if you've got any ideas, pitch them on up. And so I did. And the game Slapsy was born, which is a speed matching game. And after Slapsy, Buildsy, which is a speed building game. You're probably picking up on the pattern. So I've been able to have a lot of fun, and it's been really rewarding to be able to work with my dad and with Steve, his partner, in designing these great products that people have a lot of fun playing.
Yeah. And the other game that your dad and Steve developed is called Itsy.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
So that's the guessing game, right?
Right.
And so
I think you had a small part in that, right? Or Sheila?
No, Sheila did. Yeah. I
another one of our aunts.
I would take credit if I could. I'm really big. Or sometimes Pat will say things, Amy, Kevin said the most interesting thing. And then she repeats it. I'm like, no, that was me. And one of my issues is getting credit where credit is due. Now, will I take credit for something that's not mine? Sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes I will.
Yeah. Because you can't let anything slip through the cracks these days. Man. No. You got to get your credit when you've done it. And sometimes you got to get your credit when maybe the credit.
Someone else has made a mistake.
Around. Yeah. Someone else may not have picked up the credit. You're just going to leave it on the table now.
So Collin, this model that Pat developed of predator-prey partner, you know it very well. And for listeners, I want to give you a shorthand definition of it. And then Collin, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask for you to share 1 or 2 examples of stories, how this has applied in your life. Mm-hmm. So listeners, this is a communication model that Pat developed, and you can go check it out on her website, kirklandleadership.com. So most of the time, most of us are behaving as partners. Like right now, Collin and I are holding high respect for ourselves, for each other, all is well. Though if there was a crisis, pressure, stress, perceived threat, and we just throw COVID in there, or if one of us was really hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, one of those possibilities, we could slip into the predator showing too much aggression or dominance.
Sure.
Or the prey showing too much, being too submissive. The predator can damage relationships. The prey can trigger someone, even a nice person, to become a predator towards them. Okay, so that's the backstory for the listeners. So Collin, I live, breathe, and eat this stuff. I'm always, whether I'm on a train or watching a Netflix movie or I'm overhearing a conversation, I'm always seeing the world through the lens of this model. I mean,
that's how I do it with the fitness by Darwin thing. Yep, exactly. I'm just like, oh, if only you could just tweak this. If you only just did one exercise, I promise you it'd be so good.
Oh, yep. Yeah, that is completely the same thing.
Same thing.
So what are some stories from your past where you've had successes or failures applying the partner model?
Definitely, I would say in the process of, it's because so many of the things that I feel like I've done and have found success with have been kind of solo endeavors. No one's doing an Ironman with you for the most part.
Right.
Just about every triathlete going at that distance has to find some way to get into it themselves. At least that's how I trained. I was doing all my workouts on my own for the Ironman. And for the book designing, I was not the book designing, the book writing, very much something similar where you're doing a lot of it yourself. But at a certain point, I had to start letting people in to start seeing how this thing was shaping up.
Okay.
And with writing, I think generally when you elicit feedback, you are, by the nature of the beast, you are the prey. You're giving up your thing and you are asking, how could I make it better? And the hardest thing is when you're in this mode is realizing that you're not actually the prey, you're the partner, but it's very easy to feel the prey, and that the person you're eliciting an edit from isn't necessarily a predator. They're also a partner. So it's kind of getting a dodge between those dynamics to realize that although it may feel one way, in reality, in actuality, it's the exact opposite. What you and I are having is a great conversation. So when I opened this book up to my parents, sister, girlfriends, whomever, it was the knowledge that when they were offering feedback, it could sometimes feel like I was prey and they were predator.
Yeah.
But in reality, you have to ground yourself in the knowledge that they consider themselves your partner, and you have to also thus consider them a partner. So
I love that example, because what I think many of us struggle with this, whenever we put ourselves or find ourselves in a vulnerable position, in this case, where you're opening yourself, this body of work that you've been 150% invested in, often many of us automatically feel like prey.
Sure.
Sure. What helped you to become aware or shift into perceiving this as not a predator-prey dynamic, though as partner-partner?
Always I defaulted at first to feeling like the prey. Right? Because especially when you take a project that at that point, when I first started showing it to people, I had researched, written, re-researched, rewritten, and was then showing the third draft. I ended up writing 10 drafts for the book. So at first I thought I was close to completion, but it was the shift in realizing this is not a completed work. They're not tearing up your new work. You have as much time as you need to process these changes, that I started realizing that there was more of a partnership element. So it was just that it was so new that I was getting this types of feedback on something this type of feedback on something I was so passionate about and had spent years on at that point, that I had to pull myself out of that idea of being in the prey dynamic and move to the realization that we are in the partner dynamic. So sometimes you may feel like a predator, you may feel like prey. Yeah. But grounding yourself in the hope, if nothing else, that it's a partnership can really help you get through that feeling and kind of become more intellectual about it and appreciative for the partnership that girds the relationship. So what I'm hearing when you say be more intellectual about it, what I hear is you're creating distance, taking it less personally. And that can help. And I'm guessing, Collin, the next time, because there's going to be a next time, a lot of next times for you when you're taking on another project,
You're going to probably be in that role, that vulnerable space again. And I bet you'll more quickly close that gap and shift your thinking because, right.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, we're out of time, man.
Great interview.
This was so fun. So
Thank
Collin,
you so much.
Before I let you go, what is one call for action you have for, well, actually, I'm going to tell listeners what my call for action is and then see if you have something you want to add. So you have got to go to Collin's website, download the PDF of the book, check out his videos on Instagram, Fitness by Darwin. Mm-hmm. And those are 2 call for actions. Collin, what would you add to that?
I love that as a place to start. And you know what, if you haven't even, because if you're not someone who's completely active, just reading a book is something that hopefully, if I've done my job right, I've written a book that's actually engaging. And I'd like to think that I have. So I want to really hit that one of those points, one of those calls to action that you made. If you just read the book, then maybe this starts percolating and maybe that piques your interest. I got it that time, piques your interest to actually look at the Instagram and start incorporating this into your day-to-day life and day-to-day workouts. So
listeners, now that you have your assignment ahead of you, keep in mind next week, you're going to want to switch on, tune in, listen up, and be inspired because I'm going to be speaking with leadership expert Shirley Dalton. We're going to be talking about how your personality impacts your effectiveness as a leader. And Shirley is also going to give you an opportunity to discover your own personality type. You can check out my information on my website, carrollcoaching.com, or connect with me directly on any of my social media channels, Amy Carroll Coaching. And if you're game for more, I'll be hopping over to Facebook Live. Notice all the games, the hopping and the stretching and the push pulling. 5 minutes past the hour for a chat on today's show. Collin, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much, Aunt Amy.
And thank you, listeners. You have been listening to Partner Up with Amy Carroll on the Voice America Business Channel. Happy partnering, everyone.